now be presented to you by one of Scotland's foremost actors, Tam Dean Burn. Tam.
It has been said that they cannot fathom my motive. For the full period of my active life, I have been a teacher of economics to the working classes. And my contention has always been that capitalism is rotten to its foundations and must give place to a new society. I had a lecture, the principal heading of which was, "Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill." And I pointed out that as a consequence of the robbery that goes on in all civilized countries today, our respective countries have had to keep armies, and that inevitably our armies must clash together. On that and on other grounds, I consider capitalism to be the most infamous, bloody and evil system that mankind has ever witnessed. My language is regarded as extravagant language, but the events of the past 4 years have proved my contention. I am out for the benefit of society, not for any individual human being, but I realise that justice and freedom can only be obtained when society is placed on a sound economic basis. That sound economic basis is wanting today, and hence the bloodshed we are having. I know quite well that in the reconstruction of society, the class interests of those who are on top will resist the change. And the only factor in society that can make for a clean sweep in society is the working class. Hence, the class war. The whole history of society has proved that society moves forward as a consequence of an underclass overcoming the resistance of a class on top of them. So much for that. I have pointed out at my economic classes that owing to the surplus created by the workers, it was necessary to create a market outside this country because of the inability of the workers to purchase the wealth they create. You must have markets abroad, and in order to have these markets, you must have empire. I've also pointed out that the capitalist development in Germany since the Franco-Prussian War has forced upon that country the necessity for empire as well as this country. And in its search for empire, there must be a clash between these two countries. I've been teaching that, and what I have taught is coming perfectly true. I wish no harm to any human being. But I, as one man, am going to exercise my freedom of speech. No human being on the face of the earth, no government, is going to take from me my right to speak, my right to protest against wrong, my right to do everything that is for the benefit of mankind. I am not here then as the accused. I am here as the accuser of capitalism, dripping with blood from head to foot. The country has been exploited by the capitalists in every sphere to get the toilers to work harder to bring victory. I said at the commencement of the war that while this was being done and while assurances were being given that at the end of the war the people would get back to normal, I said that circumstances would make such a return impossible. Now I have ample evidence to support that belief. I've used it at my meetings, at Weirs, at Cathcart, that they were asking the workers to work harder and harder because there was going to be the war after the war, the economic war, which brought on this war. You see, therefore, the workers are brought into a position where they are speeded up, and they are never allowed to get back again. They are speeded up again and again. What is the position of the worker? This country's not a free country. The worker's deprived of land or access to the land. He is deprived of workshops or access to the materials and tools of production. The worker has only one thing to do in the market, and that is to sell his labour power. The capitalist purchased that labour power, and when he gets the worker inside the workshop, his business is to extract as much of that labour power out of him as possible. On the other hand, when it comes to wages, then the employer applies the principle of co-canny. Co-canny is quite justifiable when it comes to the employer giving wages to the workers, and we have seen it since the commencement of the war. Prices rose right away from the commencement of the war, while the workers' wages were kept at the old normal. Their wages were kept low. The purchasing power of the workers' wages was therefore diminished. They were therefore robbed to that extent. At the same time, the workers were asked in the name of the country to work harder. But, said the employers, we will not give you any more money, although the money you are getting is purchasing less in the way of food, etc. And that is the position. The employers are changing their opinions now as a result of experience. But in the past, they considered it in their economic interest to pay as low a wage as possible. On the other hand, the position of the workers is to give as little of their energy as they possibly can, and to demand the highest wage possible. If it's right for the employer to get the maximum of energy and pay the minimum of wage, then it's equally right for the worker to give the minimum of his energy and demand the maximum of wage. So far as Parkhead Forge is concerned, I also pointed out that none of the great big guns had been made for some time prior to the Great Offensive. When the offensive came, Gough, the friend of Sir Edward Carson, the man who before the war was going to cut down the Irishmen, retreated and lost so many guns. And then the Glasgow workers had to give over their Easter holiday in order to make those guns. And as a matter of fact, we were told that the government had dismissed many munition girls just immediately prior to the Great Offensive, so that if the workers are guilty of stoppage of output of munitions, the government is likewise responsible in the dismissal of those thousands of girls. I know that there was plenty of food in stores in Glasgow, and that the farmers had food stored up in their farms. The farmers have used the war in order to make huge profits for themselves, and then the government assisted them in connection with the potato regulations. And latterly, at the end of last year, the Corn Production Act was passed, not in the interest of the farm labourers, but in the interest of the farmers. When the demand for more food production was made, the farmers said they would do their best. And the government refused to give the farm labourers a minimum wage of 25 shillings to 30 shillings a week. 25 shillings at that time being equivalent to 10 shillings in normal times. The farmers were going to get extra as a consequence of the Corn Production Act. I therefore pointed out that if the workers went to the farmers and did not get the food stored up in the farms, they should burn the farms. We, as socialists, have no interest in destroying any property. We want property to be kept because we want that property to be used for housing accommodation or other reasons. But I specially emphasised about the farmers for the purpose to draw attention to that particular point. In the same way, when it came to a question of seizing the press, I suggested that when the Daily Record was seized, the plant should be broken up. I did not say that in connection with the Glasgow Herald. I said so in connection with the Record. Not that it's a good thing to break up print and plant, but in order to draw attention to the Harmsworth family and to the Rothermeres and so on, and their vile press, which seems to be an index of the culture of Britain. I mentioned that particularly here, that I said the Record plant should be broken up, in order to emphasise the disgust of the organised workers with regard to that particular family on newspapers. What was needed was food in order to hold our own. For, as the Glasgow Herald pointed out, when the Bolsheviks first came into power, Britain was withholding food from Russia in the expectation that frost and famine would overthrow the Bolsheviks. That is to say, they were anxious to murder men, women and children inside Russia, as well as men. The suggestion I made was in order to draw attention of the workers to the need of having plenty of foodstuffs to keep them going. So far as the government's responsibility for the murder of women and children is concerned, the reason for my statement is perfectly obvious. They have been accusing the Germans of killing women and children in this country. Perfectly true. Of course, bombs dropped in Germany have not killed women and children. Marvellous to see. But that apart, we had the government getting hold of the food supplies immediately prior to and immediately after the new year and creating a shortage. The government was therefore responsible for the queues. Women were standing in queues in the cold, and women had died of what they had contracted during their standing in the queues. The women had died, therefore, in consequence of the action of the government, and I drew the responsibility upon the government, and I do still. We know that women and children, human material, have been used up inside the factories, and the housing of the working class in this country has been so bad, and is so bad today, that the women and children of the working class die in greater proportion than the women and children of the better-to-do classes. I've always pointed out that the death rate among the working classes has always exceeded that in the better-to-do districts. Now then, I come to the doctors. The doctors I referred to were the prison doctors. When I was in Peterhead, it was plain sailing until the middle of December, and then the trouble began. I was fevered up, and being able to combat that, I was chilled down. Two men came to see me at the end of December, a prominent lecturer in this country and Mr. Sutherland MP. And to them I protested that my food was being drugged. I said that there was alcohol in the food, lowering my temperature. I know that potassium bromide is given to people in order to lower their temperature. It may have been potassium bromide that was used in order to lower my temperature. I was aware of what was taking place in Peterhead from hints and statements from other prisoners there, that from January to March, the so-called winter period, the doctor is busy getting the people into the hospital. They're breaking up their organs and their systems. I call that period the eye squinting period, because the treatment then given puts the eyes out of view. Through numerous experience, I was able to hold my own. I saw these men round about me in a horrible plight. I have stated in public since that I would rather be immediately put to death than condemned to a life sentence in Peterhead. Attacks were made upon the organs of these men and also upon their nervous systems, and we know from the conscientious objectors that the government have taken their percentage of these men. Some have died, some have committed suicide, others have been knocked off their heads, and in this way got into asylums. The very same process has gone on here. Whatever is done to me now, I give notice that I take no food inside your prisons. Absolutely no food, because of the treatment that was meted out to me. If food is forced upon me, and if I am forcibly fed, then my friends have got to bear in mind that if any evil happens to me, I am not responsible for the consequences, but the British government. If anything had happened to me that when I was last in prison, it would have been attributed to John Maclean, not to those who are working in the interests of the government. I have been able to lay down my principle and policy not from mere internal and personal experience, but from objective experience. I studied the matter carefully. I combated the evils that were going to be perpetrated by the government by reducing my food to the minimum. And the present Secretary for Scotland knows that when I was in Perth, I wrote to him asking for more food because of my reduced weight. I was about 8 stone in weight at the time. And the doctor, after weighing me, had to grant me more food. The food, however, was of no use to me. I threw it in the pot. My position is therefore that I take no more government food, that I will not allow any food to be forced upon me, and if any food is forced in upon me, I am not responsible for it. But when the government can launch millions of men into the field of battle, and perhaps the mere disposal of one man is a mere bagatelle and a trifle. I wish to draw attention to the fact that an article appeared in the Scotsman the other day about Bolshevism. And I have a feeling that that article was written especially for this trial, to create a feeling against Bolshevism. The statements in that article are a travesty. Inside Russia, since Lenin and Trotsky and the Bolsheviks came into power, there have been fewer deaths than for the same period under any Tsar for 300 years. It may be news to some of you that the cooperative movement in Russia has grown more rapidly than in any part of the world. And since the Bolsheviks have come into power, cooperation has been growing more and more rapidly. The universities have been used during the day and in the evenings to train the working classes in order that they may manage the affairs of their country in an intelligent manner. The schools have also been used in the evenings. The music halls have been used. The theatres, the picture houses, all have been used. Not for the trivial trash which is given to the people of this country, but all for the purpose of organising the production of food and the work inside the workshops and factories. The Lord Advocate pointed out here that I probably was a more dangerous enemy that you had to got to face than the Germans. The working class, when they rise for their own, are more dangerous to capitalists than even the German enemies at your gates. That has been repeatedly indicated in the press, and I have stated it as well. I am glad that you have made this statement at this, the most historic trial that has ever been held in Scotland, when the working class and the capitalist class meet face to face. The Bolsheviks got into power in October and the people wished peace. And they were doing their best to get peace. The Bolsheviks wished peace throughout the world. They wished the war to cease in order that they might settle down to the real business of life, the economic reorganization of the whole of Russia. And so far as we workers are concerned, we are not concerned with the political superstructure. We are concerned with the economic foundation of society. And that determines our point of view in politics and industrial action. Our Russian comrades, therefore, did the very same as the British have been doing. They appealed to the German soldiers and workers to overthrow their government. It would be a very bad thing for the workers of the world if a revolution were developed and carried out through to success in Germany and no similar effort were made in this country. The German workers' enemy is the same as our enemy in this country. And if it was their business and their right and their duty to overthrow their autocratic government, then it will be a duty on us not to allow these men to overthrow their government and then to allow France, Britain and Italy to march over them and make these German workers slaves at the dictates of the capitalists of the other parts of the world. There was a situation from their point of view and from our point of view too. There can only be a revolution when the workers of all countries stand united and capitalism is crushed. And until then, the war must go on incessantly and incessantly. It is not because I am against my own people. My own people are the workers here, and the workers in Germany and elsewhere. It is not the workers who instigated the war. The workers have no economic interest to serve as a consequence of the war. And because of that, it is my appeal to my class that makes me a patriot so far as my class is concerned. And when I stand true to my class, the working class, in which I was born, is because my people were swept out of the Highlands. And it was only because of my own ability that I remained. I have remained true to my class, the working class. And whatever I do, I think I am doing in the interests of my class and my country. I'm no traitor to my country. I stand loyal to my country because I stand loyal to the class which creates the wealth throughout the whole of the world. We are out for life. all that life can give us. I therefore took what action I did in the light of what was transpiring inside Russia, inside Austria, and inside Germany. You've got to bear that in mind when you wish to understand my remarks. I therefore urged the workers of this country that if they were going to strike, mere striking was useless, because they'd be starved back into work again. And that if they were going to be against the manpower bill, it meant that they were out for peace. And as there was no sign on either side of coming to an amicable constitutional conclusion, then it was the business of the workers to take the whole matter in hand themselves. War was declared. No matter the motive, no matter the cause, all constitution and order was thrown aside, and in the prosecution of the war, the British government found it necessary to throw aside every law in this country and to bring in the Defence of the Realm Act, which means the negation of all law in the country. I've repeatedly pointed out that if the government wishes to get a grip of any individual, they do so under the Defence of the Realm Act. The government have power to do anything they desire. In the plunge into war, we have the abolition of constitutional methods, and therefore I contended, and I contend today, that if it's right and proper on the part of the government to throw aside law and order, constitutional methods, and to adopt methods that mankind has never seen before, then it is equally right that the members of the working class should bring about a reasonable settlement to the workers in no victory to either side. Realizing that we, as representatives of the workers of the world, do not wish one side or the other to be the victors. We wish the status quo prior to the war to be re-established. If the workers are going to do that, then it means that they have to adopt methods and tactics entirely different from the methods which would be adopted or could be adopted under normal circumstances. Abnormal lines of action must be taken, such as our comrades in Russia took. The very circumstances of the war forced in upon the Russian workers, committees and their national soviets the line of action which they adopted, and the only way we could do it would be to adopt methods peculiar to the working class organisation in this country, in the interests of the workers themselves. The suggestions I made were intended only to develop revolutionary thought inside the minds of the workers. I was convinced, and I am still convinced, that the working class, if they are going to take action, must not only go for peace, but for revolution. I pointed out to the workers that in order to solve all the problems of capitalism, we would have to get the land and the means of production. I pointed out to them that if capitalism lasted after the war, with the growing size of the trusts, with the great aggregations that were taking place, with the improved machinery inside the works, with the improved methods in speeding up the workers, with the development of research and experiment, that we were going to have the workers turning out 3, 4, 5 times as much wealth as they had done in pre-war times. And a great problem would arise, a greater problem than ever before, in this country of disposing of its surplus goods on the markets of the world. Not only of getting markets for these surplus goods, but of getting the raw materials. We see today in the committees appointed by the government that they are anxious to get control of the markets of the world in order to exclude the Germans. These preparations are being made, it is being said, for the purpose of carrying on the war after the war. Nobody denies that there's going to be a war after the war, an economic war, between the Germans and their friends, and the British and the Americans and their friends. And there's going to be a war between the nations, and the respective governments will take care that, as far as they can, their capital will be planted in areas over which they have control. Britain herself is looking after her own interests. She's taken the German colonies. She is also in Mesopotamia and in Palestine. going there for strategic reasons. But when Britain gets hold of Mesopotamia, Palestine and Arabia, she'll use them for her own ends. We see Japan also in the outlook. Japan's been trying repeatedly to get control in northern China. She would also like to get a great big chunk of Siberia. Even today we see the tentacles being sent out, all anxious to grab more and more power. We know the secret treaties and disclosures made by our Bolshevik comrades. We know that these nations have been building up their plans so that when the Germans have been crushed, they will get this territory or that territory. They are all out for empire. That was absolutely necessary for the commercial prosperity of the nations. All the property destroyed during the war will be replaced. In the next 5 years, there's going to be a great world trade depression, and the respective governments, to stave off trouble, must turn more and more into the markets of the world to get rid of their produce. And in 15 years' time, from the close of this war, I've pointed this out at all my meetings, we are into the next war. If capitalism lasts, we cannot escape it. In 15 years' time, we may have the first great war bursting out in the Pacific. America versus Japan, or even Japan and China versus America. We have then the possibilities of another war, far greater, far more serious in its consequences than the present war. I have pointed that out to my audiences. In view of the fact that the great powers are not prepared to stop the war until the one side or the other is broken down, it's our business, as members of the working class, to see that this war ceases today. Not only to save the lives of the young men at the present, but also to stave off the next great war. That's been my attitude and justifies my conduct in recent times. I am out for the absolute reconstruction of society on a cooperative basis throughout all the world. When we stop the need for armies and navies, we stop the need for wars. I have taken up unconstitutional action at this time because of the abnormal circumstances and because precedent has been given by the British government. I am a socialist, and I've been fighting and will fight for an absolute reconstruction of society for the benefit of all. I am proud of my conduct. I have squared my conduct with my intellect, and if everyone had done so, this war would not have taken place. I act square and clean for my principles. I have nothing to retract. I have nothing to be ashamed of. Your class position is against my class position. There are two classes of morality. There's the working class morality, and there is the capitalist class morality. There is this antagonism as there is the antagonism between Germany and Britain. A victory for Germany is a defeat for Britain. A victory for Britain is a defeat for Germany. And it is exactly the same as far as our classes are concerned. What is moral for the one class is absolutely immoral for the other, and vice versa. No matter what your accusations against me may be, no matter what reservations you keep at the back of your head, my appeal is to the working class. I appeal exclusively to them because they, and only they, can bring about the time when the whole world will be in one brotherhood on a sound economic foundation. That, and that alone, can be the means of bringing about a reorganization of society. That can only be obtained when the people of the world get the world and retain the world.